Hello, welcome. Good evening, everyone. We are so glad that all of you have joined us today for our Growing Together event, where we'll be doing a panel discussion to kind of debrief and explore King in the Wilderness, the documentary. We hope that all of you have had an opportunity to take a look at the film. Tonight, we won't be viewing the film. We'll just be having a discussion. But I'm up just to give you a very brief welcome, along with one of our board members from Arbor Circle, Dr. Dante Truss. My name is Enid Gaddis. I am the Director of Equity and Inclusion at Arbor Circle, and we also want to thank our event sponsors, Grand Valley State University, Micah Myers, Macatawa Bank, and Urban League of West Michigan. And we are excited about the partnership that we have with GR MiFi, which is also very instrumental in making this event possible. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Truss to give you a welcome from our board of directors. And then I'm going to turn it over to Rodney to give a welcome from GR MiFi.
Wow, let's give her another round of applause. Such an amazing job, man. I think she said all the things that I wanted to say, but that's all right. We're going to say it differently, I guess. Greetings, or I bring greetings on behalf of the board at Arbor Circle. I'm a new member and excited new member of the board. So appreciative of all the work that happens at Arbor Circle, and I'm excited about further supporting and continuing to expand and grow that work. Thank you so much for attending this Arbor Circle Growing Together event. This is happening both virtually and in person. So for those that are out in virtual land, we bring greetings to you as well. I am B. Dante Truss, the Vice President for Enrollment Development and Educational Outreach at Grand Valley State University, where I've been there 2.5 years and in this area 2.5 years. It is also, again, my pleasure just to be able to represent the board at the event tonight. This community event is sponsored by Arbor Circle and GR MiFi, as has been mentioned, in order to commemorate the upcoming Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. holiday observance. We want to, again, thank the sponsors. I know you did it, but yeah, we'll thank them again, absolutely. We are that appreciative of all of our sponsors, and I'm delighted to say that Grand Valley State University is one of those sponsors. In addition to that, Macatawa Bank, Michael Myers, PCE Systems, and Urban League of West Michigan. With that said, I think we are in store for an amazing program this evening. We ask that you get comfortable and enjoy the exchange that we're getting ready to have. With that in mind, it is my pleasure to bring back to the mic Enid Gaddis, who is again the Director of Equity and Inclusion at Arbor Circle.
Awesome. Rodney.
So thank you, Mrs. Gaddis and Arbor Circle for partnering with Grand Rapids Media Initiative and Film Incubator. Grand Rapids Media Initiative and Film Incubator is a new organization here in Grand Rapids who focuses on narrative justice and storytelling. We're a community-based organization that articulates and convenes around issues of media literacy and, as I mentioned, narrative justice, and equity advocacy through storytelling. Our organization started about a little over a year ago in response to our production of a documentary film that we're doing here in Grand Rapids called A City Within a City, based upon the book of the same name by Dr. Todd E. Robinson. Just give a big round of applause to our apprentices that you see out on the cameras, and this incredible group of young people that we're so blessed and fortunate to be able to work with. We are an incubator identifying talent here in the city of Grand Rapids and to bring their stories to life. And again, we were birthed through our production of A City Within a City documentary film. We're grateful to partner with Arbor Circle, and they do great work. Please support Arbor Circle and the Grand Rapids Media Initiative and Film Incubator. Shout out to our partners here at Community Media Center, Wealthy Theater as well. Thank you.
All right, without further ado, we are going to jump into introducing our panel. And I'm dangerous with a clicker, so we're going to jump in. All right, we've already shared this information. Unfortunately, Shayna Haynes-Hurd, who was instrumental in helping us plan this event, is unable to be with us tonight, but we want to give a huge shout out to her. She's been with us from the beginning with all of the planning and development, and what you experience here tonight would not have been possible without her input. So shout out to Shayna, and yes. All right, now our illustrious panel. You're gonna hear a little bit from them, but just by way of introduction, we have Artemis Talley, who is a colleague at Arbor Circle. He's our street outreach specialist working in our youth development division of Arbor Circle. We have Vanessa Jimenez, another powerhouse in our community. She's a founder, CEO, mom, all around shero in our community, so we are honored to have her. Rodney Brown, if you've been in this community for any time, you probably have connected with Rodney in some way, in some space. And Rodney, I don't know if you remember, we connected first with KSSN at Ottawa Hills High School many years ago, so thank you for all the work that you're doing in the community. And then Allie Bates, an award-winning activist. Thank you, Allie, for being here. And I have to apologize that I gave Allie Rodney Brown's last name on the news last night. I didn't say Bates, I said Brown, so I'm publicly apologizing to you again. Allie Bates. All right. So we are going to open up our discussion. I'm not sure what our slide, okay, that's not the question that we want to start out with. So I'm going to open it up to the panel. And my first question that I want to hear a little bit from each of you before we jump into the questions that have been assigned is just for you all to share maybe a couple minutes to just reintroduce yourself a bit if you can, and then just tell us what initially struck you about the documentary. What was impactful to you, things that were surprises, ahas, things that resonated with you, or maybe even things that you were like, I don't know about that, right? Like, so I'm gonna start with you, Allie, and we'll just go down. You can introduce yourself more, share your pronouns, and let's just get into the discussion.
Okay. My name is Allie Bates. On social media, I'm Allie the Activist. I go by she, her. I've been an activist pretty much my entire life, but I haven't really started getting into the community up until 2020, shortly after the murder of George Floyd. And between 2020 and now, I have been helping bring awareness to police brutality and overall white supremacy that plagues our society today, especially in West Michigan. One thing that really struck me about this documentary is that, along with like a lot of other one thing I noticed about this documentary is that other documentaries mainly talk about Martin Luther King's work in terms of addressing racism. They don't really talk about his work in addressing classism, addressing, workers' rights and things like that. And it also talks about not just him, but also the people around him that also made things possible. And I think that's really important because it's a team effort, and to also talk about like his impact on the people around him. And I just think that's really important to discuss, to also discuss kind of the building up to his death and understanding that this work is not easy, and even for people as powerful as Martin Luther King, it weighed on him. And I think it's important to recognize that we are human beings, and people that address these important issues experience emotions just like each and every one of us do. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm Vanessa Jimenez. I am the CEO and owner of Mezcla Mosaic Collaborative. We are an organizational development consulting agency that focus on amplifying consultants of color and consultants with lived experiences to be at the forefront of transformation in social systems and this with a social justice framework. So as I was, kind of watching this documentary, I'd watched it a couple years ago, and as I was rewatching it, I've been doing some DEI work in the community, and so working with West Michigan leaders to improve their, intercultural competence, right? So I've been doing this work for the last couple weeks, and I viewed this documentary, and it really resonated with what I was doing in the community, to go back and kind of look at how Dr. King's legacy, a lot of what Ali said, we often focus on the racism, and his combating racism and the peaceful, right, work that he did, the nonviolent approach that he had, but this later end of his career was rooted in economic justice, was rooted in, uniting all oppressed people in these different areas, and I find that, and then again, with the 18 months of him starting this work and leading up to his death, the resistance to that and how it's easier and more palatable for us sometimes to focus on racism because racism, we see it, in every day, and we can identify maybe if we've experienced racism, but it's kind of one of those things that is like the ghost that is in the room that we can't really touch or feel, and so it feels good to say we're going to work on, we're going to practice DEI, we're going to do trainings, and we're going to do these things because then we're combating that racism, right? But when you get down to the work that he was doing with the Poor People's Campaign and economic justice and some tangible things, and he did tangible things in the fight for civil rights, right? The laws and the bills and things that were passed in terms of voting rights and whatnot. But when you look at kind of the later end of his life and the radical approach that he took, right, and the resistance to that wasn't as palatable to the white folks that were in power, that were helping him reach across the line, right? And so that just has been resonating with me, as I'm doing work, and how do we bridge cultural differences and cultural divides and have those really meaningful conversations that are sometimes hard to have, especially in West Michigan, right? When we are, the culture of West Michigan nice, right? I'm from the east side, so I'm from Pontiac, the Detroit area. It's a whole different cultural exchange coming to West Michigan, and that was a cultural, something I had to learn as I'm trying to impact community change here. And so those points really resonated with me as I was kind of reflecting back on the documentary.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Artemis. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm part of Street Outreach with Arbor Circle. I think watching this film was very interesting because I feel like it showed Martin Luther King in a way that wasn't like him being this all-encompassing hero of like kind of deifying him in a way, because at the end of the day, we always learn about him in schools of being like, oh, he did all these great things, this, that, and the third, like amazing, and we love to hear that, but we forget that he was also human. And I think we forget the struggles that he also holds in his own like life and secret, because no one knew about the struggles that he had or the like mental instability of trying to hold an entire movement on his shoulders. And I think it's really important to remember that like one person may not be able to move the entire world, but we need the collaboration of everyone. And I think we forget that he worked with so many people. He collaborated with his community, went to different parts of the country to try to unite everyone on a front of we need to fight this injustice system, and he fought it with nonviolence. But I think it's very important to remember that like he was still human. He had his faults. He had his dark moments. I think we're told a very sanitized version of him, and a version of him that's very easy to swallow and manage, because at the end of the day, we're taught this by a government that hated him, despised him. The FBI was literally listening to his conversations for the last year of his life and doing all the things to try to smear his name and trying to accuse him of all sorts of things. It's just really incredible how not only did they bury him, but they also deified him after he was dead.
Yes.
And I think that really struck me because I think he was just a real down-to-earth guy. He talked with the people. He was like, oh yeah, like I'm Martin Luther King, like, hey, come on in, let's have a conversation. And he talked with folks when he was staying in Chicago. And I think having people who knew him tell his story was much different than the sanitized version of history that we've been given. So I've really appreciated that.
Thank you.
So for me, watching the film as a filmmaker now, I have the lens of someone who wants to do a great project for Grand Rapids, the city of Grand Rapids, and talking about our history with a city within a city, and hope that we can be as good as this film was. It did, though, make me reflect on that the more things change, the more things stay the same. Absolutely. And it's just even the start of the film. Right. As the film started, it was riveting for me to hear one of his friends talk about how his sons, at the beginning of the day that he was traveling to Memphis, block the door and jump on the hood of the car. And so, you know, how impactful that was to start this film, to speak to what I thought through was this sense of abandonment, and they talked about that more in the film, but I immediately thought about abandonment. And I think the friend asked, what's wrong with these young people? And asked that question, and so then I reflect on that because I work with young people every day and reflect on that in our community often. And so I'm trying to parallel this both as a filmmaker, as someone who has been in the community doing community work for longer than I want to admit. Only in this sense, that regardless of what I've done over probably 30 years of work here in Grand Rapids, I see Commissioner Mayhew and can speak to some of the work. Shout out to Commissioner Mayhew that we did when I left California and came back home. We want to say things have changed, but I don't see a lot of change happening or positive change happening, regardless of how far we've come. There's a profound sense of sadness that I've always felt for Dr. King. This documentary really brought that home. I just recognize in that space, I think we've used language of intersectionality and what wilderness means, and this wilderness of him attempting to make change in a community that doesn't want to change. And I will probably speak to some of that more, but there was a profound sense of sadness I've always felt with Dr. King. Anything I've ever read, anything I've ever heard from his speeches, and this documentary really brought that to life. Just a profound sense of sadness.
Awesome. Thank you all. All right, we are going to jump into some prepared questions that we have for the panel, and then following that, we're going to open it up for some audience Q&A. As a reminder, we do have a virtual audience out there in internet land, so we'll be hearing from you in this room, and then also taking feedback online. For our online participants, you can start dropping any comments or questions you have in the chat at any point, and we'll be alternating back and forth to pull from those questions and hear from our live audience. So I am going to start out with our first question, and I'm going to direct that first question to Vanessa and Artemis, and then if others want to weigh in on that, we may have a few minutes, but I'm going to try to keep the train moving so we can get through these questions and then hear from our audience. So that first question is, We often hear a lot about King's focus on racism and less about his focus on poverty and the war. Why do you think these latter views are often left out of discussions on his life? What impact did King's activism have on his relationships with his wife and children? You want to go start first, Vanessa?
Yeah, I'll start. One of the things in the film, as I was thinking about this question that came to my mind was when kind of later on in the film, they were talking about the Poor People's Campaign. And he was talking about he hadn't come out at that time for or against the war. His wife was kind of out advocating against the war, but he had never made a public stance on it. And when he finally did, in his speech, he talked about how he couldn't go out and practice a nonviolent approach and not oppose the war. And so this idea that he, led in a nonviolent way, but then, and this war was raging, and he hadn't, shared his thoughts on that. It really kind of made me think about this question and how, again, kind of the palatability, right, of his work in racism and looking at that. But then when he got deeper into the work that he was doing with economic justice, and he became more radical, if you will, with his work and kind of speaking up against those things, then that's when you saw the pushback. You saw, again, like Artemis said earlier, the government started tracking him, right? When he started speaking out and looking at, if we're going to be nonviolent in our approach, really to me that I looked at the oppressiveness, right? The oppression that when we're talking about racism, that's oppressive to really one group at the time, right? I mean, as a Mexican American, when I was younger, MLK was a leader that I looked up to. We learned a lot about, right? And I didn't have a lot of representation of leaders in the Latino movement. I didn't know, right? I wasn't educated on that. So MLK, to me, it's interesting, Rodney, that you talk about the sadness, because I think this was the first time that I kind of viewed it in a way of feeling that empathy towards him, because I had too propped him up on this right pedestal. And when we prop people up on pedestals, we forget the nuances of the humanity behind it. But then it's also an easier way to forget the radical approach and the talking about the liberation of all people, really. And I think when we talked about when he was getting into his economic justice work, that's difficult to for folks to swallow in that way. So I think the reason that we put him on this pedestal and the racism, that racism was kind of his main thing again, because that's something that doesn't affect everybody, that we can't maybe all get behind because we realize, then the 1%, right? We're all part of the 99%. Right. And so I think that caused some tension in how he was starting to be viewed in acting out, and speaking out against the war and his work later on in life. And I don't know if you want to speak to that or talk maybe about the second part of that question with the effects on his family.
I think I have some thoughts on that first part of the question too, because I think it's very interesting how he finally stepped up and talked against the war, the anti-war, but it's just like, that's not a surprise. Right. He was entirely talking about, nonviolent things and like wanting peace for all, so of course he's not going to support a war. I think it's very interesting that people really started to turn that back on him once he spoke up, and I think it's so interesting because it's just like, he was preaching this the entire time, and I think one of those things to really think about is how people love to put other people in boxes for their own comfortability, of being like, like you are just a civil rights man. You can stay over here in this line, be one of the like good black men, and that's that. Like you can't speak about anything else. But it's just like, no, there's more things, the intersectionality of like, hey, these oppressions with racism also applies for classism and poverty, and trying to like move in ways that connected more people. And I think they were scared of that because at the end of the day, more numbers, then you start to grow and you outgrow the power that's supposed to oppress you. And it's just very fascinating that even people who were like working in his circles also turned their back on him. Yes. I didn't expect that, and also it's so funny how we're taught about him and never told about his anti-war like stance. Yeah. And all of the times it's always about like March on Washington, him doing the like I have a dream speech and all of these things, but I think the nuance of him also fighting for all races, for like standing up against poverty, because he was like, yeah, let's bring everybody to the table to speak about like poverty and trying to get together. And I think it's really, it just reminds me how sometimes people be like, oh yeah, you know, that one person did that one thing and that has to be their entire life. They can never exit that. Like when people talk about like actors, I think, oh, Daniel Radcliffe, everyone goes, oh, Harry Potter. But I'm like, what about his other movies? He's had an extensive list of movies he's been in, or the times he's been on Broadway. He is on Broadway currently. It's just like no one talks about these little things because we just like to put them in a box and that's it. Nothing else. And I think that really stood out to me. And circling to the end of the question of like how his work impacted his family, I think I never really thought about like the family aspects, because at the end of the day, we never are told these things. These stories are never shared. And I think it's fascinating because I would have never assumed that like he would have been the distant patriarchal figure of like, oh, he's out doing work, but like he can't come home, he's too tired. He's holding up an entire movement on his shoulders. So he's not there during dinner, he's just thinking about other things. His mind is everywhere. And I think it's kind of sad how this dramatic irony happened in the movie when you're watching it of Dr. King saying, after I come back from Memphis, I'm gonna spend more time with my family. I think I'm gonna like take a step back and really reconnect with them. And he never had that chance because he never came back. And I think that was the part that really brought the sadness that you mentioned earlier, Rodney. So, yeah.
And you know, Rodney spoke to the abandonment, the first scene, kind of, and that made me think, and you can probably speak to this too, but the activists, right, community activists, when we are fighting for a greater cause, the sacrifice that we, not only ourselves as activists, but then our families have to take, and then the added, you know, stressors of the trauma, right, the death threats, feeling unsafe, you know, not having that sense of security within their own homes. And so you know, there's the psychological effects of that, right? As children growing up and not quite understanding this, you know, the need for the leadership of Dr. King, of your dad, right? When they're not at the dinner table, when they're, you know, too tired to interact or play. And so it just really made me think about, you know, activism as a whole and how, and the sacrifice that we have to, you know, have as families when we're out trying to make these big, you know, community changes, and how lonely that can feel, right? In both regards, the family, the loneliness of the family, but then as an activist and how you stand up, but then again, the mental, you know, load that you see at the end of the film and how it wore on Dr. King. Again, it's like the humanity of it. And when we center humanity, then we can see the whole person. And I think in Dr. King's story, we didn't center his humanity. Like you said, he was a godlike figure in, you know, in the literature and how we are taught about him in educational systems. And so I think that was a point, you know, in terms of just the family humanity and how do we center humanity in activism so that we don't lose the sense of the full person when it comes to that.
Thank you. One of the things that in the film that really struck me is that Dr. King really did speak to that issue. He said in the film that one of the most frustrating aspects of his activism were the great demands. And he said that they were made it impossible for him to carry out the responsibilities of being a father and a husband. So when you think about the humanity of feeling like I brought these children into the world, I have this wife, and my calling, my career, my vocation actually puts me at odds with what is most important to me, and it actually puts their safety and their well-being at risk just by me choosing to be in this space. That is quite a burden to bear. Yeah, thank you both. I'm gonna move us on to the next question. I think we've kind of talked about question number 2, which was the price that, all right, what the price that his family paid. My clicker is not cooperating. let's see. Okay, here we go. Question number 3, Rodney, I'm going to direct this to you. How, and we have, Vanessa touched on this a little bit too, but would love to hear from you about how does this reflect your own experience in doing social justice focused work? How, in terms of balancing the needs of the movement, whatever that movement is, and personal responsibilities to family, those types of commitments?
No, it makes me reflect back to my first daughter when I was in my 20s. I wasn't spending enough time with her. She was 13 years old, and she calls me and says, "Dad, you're more worried about the black community than you are your own 2 black kids."
Wow,
And she was 13.
wow.
And she's really smart, you know, my baby. She's really smart, and I raised her to speak for herself, and she shared her voice, and that's how she felt. And I asked her to give me a call back, because I'm going to hang up right now. So I just hung up on her. She called me back, though, and just talked that through with me. It's always a challenge for people, politicians, people who work, let alone activists, when you're not given that time to your family. I was a teen dad, and there was no excuse for me not being able to give my kids the time because I was out doing community work. Since then, though, my wife, I'm married 22 years now. My wife gives me a hard time for not being home as much. Even today, she wants to know, when am I going to be home?
Soon.
It's always soon. It's always soon. Yeah, but it's never enough. I mean, it's just, again, I'm pained by the sacrifice that Dr. King's kids had to make, not knowing that they were making sacrifices. His wife, though Coretta Scott King, as the film indicates, was in the movement and was passionate about social justice. It wasn't called social justice then. And so they were kindred spirits, if you will, and she embraced Dr. King. There was still a sacrifice there, but I'm mostly paying for the kids, not knowing that the sacrifices that they made. Even in the film, when he did get a chance to sit down with his family for dinner, and one of his sons says, "Dad, you're quiet. You're not saying anything." And I just can appreciate the way he responded.
Yeah.
He said, "I'm trying to enjoy this, this food." But they wanted him to be there, as parents do. They wanted to hear his voice. And if you've ever listened to any of them and other civil rights activists or activists whose parents were taken from them, there's a pain that exists that at that time they don't even really realize.
Absolutely.
So,
Thank
yeah.
you. All right. Our next question. How does this quote resonate with you? And we're going to direct this first to Allie and then to Artemis. As much as he did, he always blamed himself for not doing enough. He was a kind of workaholic where he was never content. He was driven by a kind of need for perfection, and he was always feeling that he wasn't doing his best. I think because of his feeling that somehow he wasn't good enough to be the leader. Those were periods when he was really just physically exhausted, and that's a quote from Andrew King that was in the film. Andrew King, sorry. Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Mayhew. Andrew Young. Allie, you want to weigh in on that?
Personally, this quote resonates with me very deeply because it's a feeling that I am all too familiar with as an activist. When you're an activist, you kind of look at the world, and especially even looking at the world back then versus now, much has not changed. And you feel the need to address everything that's important, address the climate change, address racism, address classism, address homelessness, so many different things that need to be addressed, so many different things that are wrong with this world. And it's like so much for one person to try to address, one group to try to address. And one thing a lot of people have always told me is that you can't save the world, but when you have a platform and it's so important to you to bring awareness to so many different topics, it's hard to not want to try. And having that pressure as a leader, having so many people looking at you, it's overwhelming sometimes. It can be very overwhelming, especially as a human being. And, you know, I can only imagine how Martin Luther King felt because he had the entire country looking at him. He had so many different groups of people looking at him, and he's just one man. It's just a lot to go through, especially him. He was doing it for 12 years. That's a long time. And it kind of also goes into how it affected his family, because when you're an activist, that's a strong calling. That's an ancestral calling. And you want to be there for your family, you want to be there for yourself, you want to take care of yourself, but you feel the need, such a strong calling to take care of the people around you, to take care of your community. And it's so much pressure that I don't think anyone will really understand until you're in that position. And it's, like I said, it's just something that I recognize all too well, even being as young as I am.
Thank you. Artemis?
Yeah, I think I internalized the question a little bit differently from that, but like, I think in my head, when I first thought of this question, I thought of my time being in social work, because I've been working with the homeless youth population for the last 5 years now. And I think over my time doing that, I've been realizing that there are plenty of moments where I'm sitting there and I'm just like, they put me in charge? I'm supposed to be doing this stuff? Me? I'm not an adult. Like, in all of that moments of being like, I'm looked at as the adult, and I'm looking for the adult, like, which one gonna help us out? We need somebody with an oar. And then I'm like, oh, that's me. Yeah. And I think it's just that interesting moment of being like, even if you're so qualified to do the job you're doing, even if you have the experience, there's still those moments where your mental health really comes in and be like, who are you? Who do you think you are to do all of these things and trying to save the world and do all of these things, but you can't take care of your own self? When was the last time you had a meal? When was the last time you sat down and actually like did something for yourself? Because I think for a hot second, I was really experiencing burnout, especially at the beginning of the pandemic. At that point, I was working at a homeless shelter, so everyone else was getting days off in quarantine, but the homeless shelter can never rest. So I worked every single day when everyone else was on break, and it really drains on me because I had to do all of this work and put all of myself into my clients so they could succeed, and I didn't have enough to pour back into myself. And I think about that for Martin Luther King, because I think about all the times where he had to go and be the face of the movement. He had to be the one in charge and doing all of the things, and then him putting his own mental health to the back burner, just being like, he can never speak that. And also on top of that, like, mental health is just not really covered in people of, like, in Black communities. It's just like, when we think about therapy, we think about, oh, that's a white people thing. But no, everyone's gonna need that help to process, to like really sit there and springboard ideas off of another person. You have to really take care of yourself in order for yourself to take care of other people. And I think that's what I really connected with in this like question of like how many times I get really burnt out, how much I hate the system, how much I hate working within said system, and the powerless of people begging you for help and you don't have any because there's no resources. Wow. And I think it's just that I've learned in my time, you have to set boundaries with yourself. And I think that's why I took a step back from activism work, because in my college years, I was on the front lines. I was with Cutie POC, queer and trans people of color, and we were like doing protests out on Grand Valley's campus. We were working with the NAACP and like doing marches across the campus, and I was really involved with that for a few years, but I got real tired. I wasn't taking care of myself, and I think now I still do my work, but I've learned I have to put boundaries up. Like at 5 o'clock, I clock out. I'm sorry, I don't think nothing more about this job, and that's okay, because that's how I preserve myself, because it's so exhausting. I can't just be social worker Artemis 100% of the time, because then I'm not going to get myself taken care of, and that's gonna be reflected poorly in my work. So I think it's just one of those things we have to remind ourselves it's okay to take care of ourselves, even when we get so much enjoyment helping other people. We have to help ourselves too.
Thank you. Thank you. That was a very powerful part of the film too, the part of the film where it talked about the recognition that maybe Dr. King needed some psychiatric therapeutic support. And when I first watched the film, that part actually brought me to tears, because in my mind back then, where would he have gone? Who would the said psychiatrist have been that would have been safe for him to go to? I'm not saying that that person maybe didn't exist, but if they did exist, they were probably a unicorn of some kind. Like who, you know, so, and just the reality that because of safety and because of the way that the FBI was on him, that they couldn't even trust that a system that is designed to support people in distress would likely do him harm. So all of your comments really resonate there. All right, let's keep going. We had a part B, and I'm gonna ask either one of you can take this, Vanessa or Rodney. This is a second quote that we shared from the film, and it is long, so bear with me, but it is very powerful. I'm going to quote my ex-husband on this question of how we should remember Martin Luther King. Bevel said, "The Wright brothers were probably pretty good guys. Wouldn't it be a shame if we had a holiday once a year where we praised the Wright brothers and talked about how great they were instead of developing their contribution, instead of developing aviation?" With Martin Luther King, we have the holiday and talk about how wonderful he was, but we really should develop his work, which was nonviolent social change. We should study nonviolence and apply it and develop it. Back in the 1960s, we did not know if nonviolence would work. Now we know that it does. I think we should take advantage of it and indeed bring about the better society that we can. Let's start with you, Rodney. Reactions to that quote.
Yeah, I don't know if nonviolence worked. So with our film, and those of you who are familiar with Dr. Robinson's work, he lifts up the different strategies that Black people in Grand Rapids used in order to fight the system or to overcome this insidiousness of racism and white supremacy here in Grand Rapids. And I think the jury is still out. And I think as what I thought most compelling for me in the film was the interviews that was taking place when he and Stokely Carmichael were walking. Yeah. And I just thought that that was incredible that they both kept their, not just composure, but this respect for each other. Yes. And one of the things that I recognize and that we're doing with our film as well is that there's not one strategy. There's not one way to beat or fight or to overcome this insidiousness of institutional racism or white supremacy. And I don't even know if Dr. King, and I'll say it humbly, would believe that, as he was quoted as saying that he felt that he was leading his people into a burning building. Yeah. And so when we talk about integration, separation, nonviolence, Black power, it's a lot of language that I think we need to get our arms around. So if we can lift up now these various strategies and we talk through these strategies, Stokely Carmichael makes the point in the film that he was raised in New York. It makes me think what Vanessa said, being raised on the east side of the state. Some people believe, I'm one of them, believes that we have a right to defend ourselves. And I, as empathetic or compassionate as I may be, as hopeful as I may be for people to get along, you're not sicking any dogs on me. You're not punching me in my face. You're not hitting me with a rock. I'm gonna fight back because I come from Southeast Grand Rapids where we fight back. So that's just me. And it doesn't mean philosophically I didn't understand. I understand nonviolent resistance. It's not as passive, and you have to be strong, and I respect that, but it was a strategy. And I'm not sure that that was the best strategy. And I think that we could have then, and I think now, talk about these various strategies, these various philosophies. And when too often we will lift up an individual like Dr. King, he's a hero of mine as well, and not really unpack what he was doing, what he was saying. So it's incumbent upon us in a current framework to lift up those strategies and talk about, was that the right thing to do? Is it the right thing to do now? And again, we hope that our film, A City Within a City, lifts up those various strategies, Urban League strategy, NAACP strategy, grassroots strategy over here, people working inside the system, people who are working outside the system. But to think that there's just one strategy that's gonna win in fighting a overbearing system of white supremacy is, I think, wrong thinking.
Thank you. Anything you want to add, Vanessa?
Yeah, I mean, you said a lot of my kind of the sentiments in looking at this quote. It was how I kind of resonated with the quote is in my work, and you know, I've done diversity education training and DEI work, you know, throughout the year in some capacity, and then in 2020. You know, when George Floyd murder and the racial unrest that was happening, I got a lot of organizational leaders contacting me and, hey, can we do DEI training? You know, we need a DEI training. And as we would have further conversations, they weren't ready to do the deep work. They wanted to check off a box, right? And I actually took a step back from DEI work in 2020 because I didn't have the capacity to deal with the folks like that, right? I just wasn't in the space to do DEI work, and so I had to take a step back. But you know, as I kind of re-engage myself in that work, it reminds me of this quote that, you know, it's nice to celebrate and to do the surface level work, right? To have a day off, MLK Day off or whatnot. But it's harder to actually take those strategies and make change, right? It's harder to actually do the work. And so I think, you know, in the work that I do in the community work, it's how deep are we willing to go to make these changes? Because you can do a, you know, DEI, Diversity 101 training, and you can feel good about that, but that's surface level. That's celebratory, that's performative in some ways, right? I think about, you know, the city of Grand Rapids, you know, in September of 2021, we did a declaration that racism was a public health, you know, crisis. And then less than a year later, we're dealing with a community crisis of a black man murdered by GRPD, and we're wondering, where did we go wrong? You know, why are we still in this spaces? We're still having these continuous conversations, and so when we look at performatively doing things, that we're not doing that deep level work that is hard, that's uncomfortable, that leaves us vulnerable, especially in dominant, you know, cultural groups, right? That we have to look at ourselves and really think about what are we willing to sacrifice and to change in order to really improve and say and walk the walk, you know, walk the talk, like we're saying. So that's how, you know, again, I reflected back on that quote in community, and Yeah.
Yeah, that's very powerful. Thank you both for sharing, because you're talking about we kind of pat ourselves on the back for the optics sometimes, but we don't go deeper and operationalize the change that really can impact our systems and communities. Thank you. All right, this is our last question before we open it up for some audience Q&A. So I encourage our folks online, if you have some questions that you want to put into the queue to ask the panel, you can start dropping those in the chat and we can get those into the queue. But our last question that we're going to have for the panel is, this film reflects on how racism is impacted by place, specifically referencing differences between the North and the South. Considering the environment we have here in West Michigan, are there specific elements of our own community that are reflected in the racism and oppression present here? And we're going to direct that to Vanessa and Allie. And Allie, I want to start with you.
There's definitely a bit of a difference, a large difference actually, in between racism, how it's shown down south versus in the north. Down south, it's more predictable, it's more in your face, it's blatant, but when you're in places like Michigan, of course we have a phrase for it, West Michigan nice, it's not so much in your face, but it's more of not really supporting certain policies that would go directly against racism. Like, one thing I've definitely noticed, and it kind of plays into how performative some people are, with my own experiences, seeing how so many people rose up during the uprisings and speaking up against racism when it's trending and when it's palatable, but actually having discussions about, okay, now it's time for y'all to look at yourselves, to look within yourselves, to not only look within yourselves, but the community around you. So many people were okay with jumping up and screaming about the injustice that happened in different states, but when it came to talking about what happens here, every single day, it started to become an issue. And obviously, not much has changed. We have the declaring racism a public health crisis. We have Breonna Taylor Way, Martin Luther King Street, all these different dedications to people in the movement, people who have lost their lives to this movement, yet no actual policy changes, no real work being done. It's been over 2 years, almost 3 years, since I've started this work, and a lot hasn't changed. It's interesting because in the beginning, it seemed like, city officials and different people were willing to have these conversations, and they will have these conversations in your face and be like, oh yeah, I understand, I hear you, I feel you, I'm with you. But when it comes to having these difficult conversations about, okay, this is an issue that's happening here, this is how we should fix it as a community, when it's not something that's going in their favor, it's not a conversation they want to have anymore. And suddenly, when you make them uncomfortable, when you make anyone uncomfortable who's not really wanting to do the real work, you become the enemy. And that's when that racism, that subtle racism shows. Doesn't make it less impactful than, someone being blatantly racist. At least those people are honest. But the racism here, they don't think they're racist because they're not all up front in your face calling you racial slurs. They think, oh, well, it's not that I don't like black people, it's that I don't exactly, support things that would benefit them, that would make them more safe. We've had conversations long before Patrick Lyoya's murder about things that we could do as a community to prevent something like this happening. A lot of us local activists, grassroots organizers have specifically said, this is going to end up in someone losing their life. And instead of having these conversations and really thinking, they keep coming to these meetings, they keep showing up outside, maybe there really is something wrong. Instead, someone had to lose their life for people to realize that something is wrong, and even to this day, nothing really has changed. And I'm fearful that it never will change, and that someone else is gonna have to lose their life, and it's like, the lack of self-reflection, the smiling in your face while not really wanting to do anything besides just surface level work, it's definitely a northern thing, definitely definition of West Michigan nice. And like I said, at least down south, they're honest. They're not gonna play in your face.
Well, 2 snaps and a clap to all you things you said, because I agree. Very similar to the thoughts that I have written down when I was talking about this question, so I won't repeat, but, just amplify the points that you were making about, in the South, the overt racism versus in the North, they kind of had that covert racism that they faced, and how, there's parallels to that in West Michigan community, in all communities, right? But in terms of our community, I am from the East Side. I went to school in Kalamazoo. I moved to Iowa for 7 years, Iowa City, very rural, white community. And so coming to Grand Rapids, the way that when I came back 6 years ago now, it was sold to me that, we are, right, the buzzwords. Well, DEI, we're inclusive, building an inclusive city, we've got all these initiatives. And so I was like, okay, let's go, I live on the southeast side, so I'm in 49507, so I was intentional about, being in communities where there was more diversity and racial diversity. And so I was excited to come here. And then I found a lot of that covert racism, like, oh, okay, especially working with leaders and organizations, right? Even in the city, we've created new offices and stuff. What is the power that those offices have to make decisions, to make changes, right? How do we hold systems and people in power accountable? And it comes back to that personal reflection. When I'm working with organizations and they want to, we want to do a DEI plan, and they have all these ideas, but it's like, okay, but let's look at your policies. How do we create more equitable policies? What is the language that we're using, right? These nuances of things that are deeper level, you have to have a higher level of consciousness when you're really talking about making behavioral changes that are tied to our own cultural values, our upbringings, our beliefs. Even as people of color, we have to unlearn a lot of the things that we've learned, because we are all, if you live in the United States, if you've gone through systems of education and all these things, we're all part of this ingrained institutional racism and anti-blackness and white supremacist culture. We all have to unlearn that. And that is what it is. Let's speak. When we say white supremacy, before, like a couple years ago when I got back into the work, it's like, we can't talk about white supremacy because that will make white people uncomfortable. Well, it is what it is. We all are, suffer from that in some way, right? We all have to unlearn that. And so let's talk about things as they are, and let's bring that to the table rather than this covertness that happens. And, we want to be progressive and we have, all of these things, but yet we're not looking deeper at how we can actually affect change and make changes within our community that are tangible, that are actionable, and that will create safer communities for all of us. So.
Thank you. You're really speaking to the systemic pieces that have to be in place to affect real change. Yeah, go ahead, Artemis.
I just got a thought, maybe. I was just reflecting. At first, I wasn't going to do this one because I knew it was going to get messy, but here we go. We're just going to say it. Y'all asked me to do this.
We did.
I think it's one of those things that, specifically for West Michigan, I think a lot of people try to use all these buzzwords, and I think I'm talking from my experiences in like academia and me being at Grand Valley, of just being like, oh yeah, like inclusion, equity, diversity, we love it, we got it. And GV always being like, the most diverse freshman class, see what's happening? Why so many people, students of color coming over? I'm like, it's because you don't tell them the actual truth. I came from Detroit, and I was born and raised in Detroit, 7 Mile Van Dyke, East Side, all day. And they really pushed on the East Side this beautiful campus, but they don't tell you it's in Allendale and not Grand Rapids. And they don't tell you about how in Allendale, they real questionable out there. I remember plenty of times going around school and there'd just be those like little snide things where somebody look at me up and down. I'm just like, are they doing it because I'm gay? Are they doing it because I'm black? I can't even imagine. It's so much things that people don't realize because they've been in this little bubble and they just like, okay, this is it, this is cool. And maybe the only black person they experience is A, somebody who was adopted, or B, something in the movies, and they don't know what to do with it in real life. And I think it's one of those moments where we always love to try to like tout of being like, oh, we know all this theory, we know all of these things. Racism, bad. And I think we got to this moment where like everyone's just like, we got a black president, everything's cool, everything's chill, vibing. But I'm just like, no. There's still things we need to address. The racism that's happening, the police brutality, the inequalities that people are still experiencing today. And I think it's one of those moments where people have to take themselves accountable and actually do the work deep inside. And I really appreciate what you both said of like, there's no reflection on that. They just think, oh yeah, I'm a good person. I would never do like something heinously racist and then come up to me and be like, you should take your mask off because you would be more approachable that way, even though the library staff was also wearing masks and yet they're approachable, and you came up to me and wanted to talk to the, okay, Karen, let's sit down. I think it's one of those moments where it's just like, if we have all this theory and no praxis, it don't mean nothing. It's just all performative. And I think that's a thing that the Midwestern nice really wants everyone to be nice, and they don't actually want to be like, hey, let's call in instead of call out, of being like, that was kind of messed up what you did. Let's like sit down and have a conversation about how you can do better and how like what you said wasn't the right thing. Like, let's really hold each other accountable, because that's what real friends do, not just the thing of being like, oh yeah, I'm gonna always back you up. Even if you do some, I'm still back you up. I'm like, no, that's not loyal. That's just a yes, ma'am. But that's it. That's what I'm saying.
Thank you. Let's give our panel a hand. Thank you all so much for sharing your insights. We're going to move now into the audience Q&A. So I'm going to walk my mic back here to this mic stand, and we're going to ask if you, well, let me start here. We're going to ask if you have a question, if you would go to the mic so that we can kind of have the camera focus on you for our online audience for the question. If it is difficult for you to move and you'd rather stay in your seat, we will bring a mic to you. So I'm going to start with that crowd. Is there anybody who would like to say something, but coming to the mic might be a challenge? If you raise your hand, we will come to you. Okay.
Yes, my name is Paul Mayhew, and once upon a time, I was an activist, and I still kind of consider myself part of the movement. But what I ultimately found out is that you have to make the movement, and I found out that movements are made to move as opposed to stay static. Static is it's moving, but it's going back and forth. And through that situation, ultimately I found that going into partisan politics, began to help hone the movement. Now, I'm not going to be long, but in 1980, I was part of the convention in Memphis. There was a Democratic, what they call mini convention in Memphis, where I met John Conyers, all of the top echelon in the political arena. And we set out that as an ACORN member, we're going to come back to the community and develop a platform. We came back to the community and developed a platform. So that's why you see housing issues right now in the Democratic platform, because it was a group of people that met and said, go back to your communities. Go and ask your neighbors what do they want to see manifest in a platform. So we did that. Held meetings at Pilgrimage Church, held meetings at Stocking School, held meetings all over this community, and developed a platform. Then we came back together and manifested the platform and inserted it into the Democratic Party in 1980. So all the stuff that you see now in the party's platform that fits us as black folk came from the 1980 convention, where Jesse Jackson, myself, and Paul Tips and all these other people got together and inserted the platform into the Democratic platform. And so now we got issues that we can work together on inside the platform. Now, I'm going to try to wind it down because I could be long. But what began to happen is people came together, you know, from diverse communities that, well, just because I'm white and I live over here, that don't mean that what you're talking about don't affect me, because it does. And just because you're white, black, and I'm white, we got to figure out how we work together on this stuff. So Jesse Jackson came up with the concept of operational unity. Operational unity, what does that mean? That means that we don't have to be falling in love with each other to work together. We can work together under the banner of operational unity and move our community from point A to point B. Now, I'm going to close with this. Once upon a time, I chaired the Acorn People's Platform Committee. And then once upon a time, we in this community, we were the ones that supported Jesse Jackson on his campaign to become president. So he won Michigan. So we took operational unity to California and inserted it again in the platform. Then we came back out and worked on operational unity. You don't have to be in love with me to work and do this work. You just have to be willing to move from point A to point B. And so I think that there are some outlets to do this work, but you have to be open-minded to do it. And I got a lot of examples like that. Let me close by saying there was a guy once, when we was in Memphis, there was a racist guy from down south that talked about how the Klan and the black community worked together. So when they worked together on an issue, they knew they were working together. But the real racist whites, the ones that own the corporation and stuff, we say, we can't have this. We can't have Joe John on the plantation working with Paul Mayhew. We can't have them working together, because then that defeats our purpose of keeping it divided. Because if we keep it divided, then we can do the money the way we want to do the money. I'm going to stop here.
Anyone else? If you are interested in making a comment and can move to the microphone, I'm going to bring the stand over there. If you want to make a comment and you aren't able to come to the mic stand, please just raise your hand. Our lovely assistant, Hannah, raise your hand. We'll bring the mic to you. Again, we're open for questions, comments that you have about the film, and or questions you have for the panelists.
Okay, yeah, I'll just hold it like this. Thank you. I got to spotlight everything. All right, so, hi, I'm Jose Rodriguez. It might be a little much of a question, a little heavy of a question, but I would just appreciate all your answers. So my question is this. So on Monday, this upcoming Monday, the Urban League of West Michigan is hosting their annual MLK corporate breakfast at DeVos Place. No one told me the revolution would cost $150 a ticket, but taking into consideration the work that Dr. King did to address economic injustice, do you believe that such an event falls out of line as what Dr. King would have hoped to see in our society today? And while I understand that it's a necessary evil to ask corporations for funding in order to do important work such as this panel, I'd like to know what your thoughts on folks of color having to rely on nonprofits, corporations, and the DeVos's funding to help meet our needs. And, sorry, like I said, it's going to be heavy. And as such, do they hold the power to subvert our movements as they hold the dollars that help fund this work? and would not allow work to be too radical in order to exist in Grand Rapids.
Can we get that thrown up on the screen? Because you said a whole word.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
I just want to
yeah.
acknowledge Jose. Congratulations. He was just elected, appointed the Grand Rapids School District. So congratulations, and it's your question and just your thought pattern. I'm excited to have you on that board. So
Thank
you said a lot. Does anybody want to take some of that, or do you want me to? You said a whole word.
Well, I guess the last question is my main question is do we allow corporations to subvert our movements because they are the ones funding this type of work? And what do you think about that in terms of this economic, justice that MLK Jr. wanted in order for us to have, as a people, right, to have, our own communities where we're thriving and we have, the economic freedom to do these things without having to rely on those, those in power?
Yeah. Whew, this is a loaded question for me, being a 15-plus year nonprofit professional and working in the philanthropic space. I think the nonprofit industrial complex and the philanthropic industrial complex is here to oppress people of color and marginalized individuals, and so I have a challenge with that. There's also the point of, take bad money and do good with it, right? And what parameters can you do that? So I see, we've talked about playing kind of different roles in this movement and how we move about, and I think there is space for money that is maybe comes from oppressive places, right? And how we yield that power as nonprofits, as organizations that take that money. I think you can do good with bad money, but what are the parameters around that? And I think that's, just getting into, again, the nonprofit industrial complex. We have a lot of nonprofits in West Michigan, the amount of churches and charitable groups in nonprofit. I mean, that's a big part of the challenges that also lie within our communities. And so, when we talk about systems, I mean, those systems were set up to continue to oppress people of color, to continue to oppress marginalized groups. And so, it's like the devil you know and the devil you don't know, right? And so I think as leaders, as people in the movement, as activists, we have to always kind of look at things and say, okay, what's the worst that can happen from this, right? Taking money from, whatever, what's the best that we can do with it? And I've been leading nonprofits. I've worked with nonprofits and grant funding, and worked with, our funders here, and so there are some changes that are being made, right? There are some ways that you can, use bad money for good, but I think we always have to use discernment when we have the opportunity to, to partner with people that maybe don't, that are pushing back on movements, or that, again, don't align with really the progress that we want to see made. There's always a way to be creative, and as people of color, as people from marginalized groups, we're resourceful, right? We're going to band together and figure a way, and so, that's what I kind of offer to that question, because it's very nuanced and complex, and there's a lot of, different ways to go about that, so.
I'll take a stab, and though probably differ than Vanessa in this way. Yeah, I think these are all ideas, and that people who are relentless towards their ideas, that's not a money issue. It's not. So I don't believe that some of the people you named, if I believe that they, because they have their names on buildings, that they ultimately are in control, then I wouldn't believe in my own ability to define for myself. So I just don't subscribe to that because I think it's all ideas. I see people with money, with bad ideas, who can't get their ideas implemented. I see people with heart who are in our neighborhoods, who organize relentlessly, just as relentlessly as people with the billions of dollars. I believe that. I believe that we will be successful from our neighborhoods because it starts with the idea. So I just don't give them, whoever them and they are, the type of power over me or my community, whether they write a check or not. They don't have power over me. They're not my Lord. one of the things that that I am challenged by, Andrew Young said in the film, and I think most of us are with Dr. King, trapped by his own beliefs. I'm trapped by my own beliefs that I can overcome. That, as Mr. Carl Smith taught us, those that have the power to define have the power to determine. Me being a young kid who, up until 6th grade, I didn't engage with any white people in Grand Rapids until I went to school on the west side. No knock if we got some west siders in here, but when we talk about geography, understanding geography, if you don't understand that in Grand Rapids and know the institutional memory, you really don't know the system that you're fighting. And this is for all of us. I tease my friends who think that they know racism, but did not get bused from Southeast Grand Rapids to the west side, that you don't really know racism until you have to go into hostile communities as black people that may be even similar to the South. But we had that right here in Grand Rapids, going over to the west side. So I just don't subscribe to that. Give the Urban League that 150 if you have it. I'm an Urban Leaguer as well. Used to be a president of the Urban League. Let me lift up Brother Mayhew real quick on something that we did 30 years ago. And I'm in my 20s. And this is relentlessness. This had nothing to me to do with money or corporate power or anything. It was just the relentlessness of the opposition. We see that just happen with Ottawa Impact. They had $100,000 that they organized and took over an entire county. We know that it's not money that does it, it's our heart, it's our ability to organize. But I'll tell you that we had police community relations issues in the 90s. After we come back from the Million Man March, this is a fact. We come back from the Million Man March, we organize with Brother Mayhew around Operational Unity. We want to get a police review board established with the city of Grand Rapids. We do our due diligence and do a campaign and go out and get signatures. The city of Grand Rapids was so, the politicians particularly, it was Mel Logie at the time, did an end around on us to establish the Police Civilian Appeals Board without the power to subpoena and investigate, when we had a campaign that we were organizing in order to establish the Police Civilian Appeals Board with the power to subpoena and investigate. And what they did is kind of out-organized us, is not anything else, and then took it to a vote of the commission and established the Police Civilian Appeals Board without those powers. Were they being directed by the people in, the paternalistic group here in power? I don't know. I don't know if that was the case. I know that we were out-organized. I know that we did our part. And so Jesse Jackson talks about it a lot in the film. Lastly, let me just say, I would be remiss. There's an individual who's in the film who I had an opportunity to meet, one of Dr. King's best friends. I used to talk with him on the telephone. He was my fraternity brother as well. So Reverend Ralph Abernathy, I'd be remiss if I didn't share that. So he's passed away, Reverend Abernathy. But I used to call Reverend Abernathy and have conversations with him about movement. So I just want to lift up Reverend Abernathy, who's not speaking in that film, but I wouldn't consider him a friend, but he was somebody I talked to regularly. And again, big shout out to Paul Mayhew and this idea around operational unity. We're not going to lose as long as we don't believe that we're going to lose. just if I could follow up to that, we have to look at institutional memory too. So back in the early 90s, when Engler, is that his name, was the governor? Yeah. When Engler was the governor and he led, as the Republicans were controlling the House here, stopped cities from being able to have residency requirements. That happened in the early 90s. And so one of the issues is that when you talk about police officers or police within the city of Grand Rapids, what if we had a residency requirement in the city of Grand Rapids? But we can't, the city of Grand Rapids couldn't even call for a residency requirement because the state put a rule in place to say that cities cannot do residency requirements. But up until that point, a lot of our school systems, a lot of our government entities would at least talk about that. But I would offer that that's a solution, is that we challenge the state. We've got control of the state now. Let's challenge the state and let's get our state elected officials to talk about residency requirements. Because if we wouldn't have some of these cowboys who were coming into our community, we wouldn't have the Leola incident. If we didn't have these cowboys who don't care anything about black and brown people in our communities.
So it was talked about kind of through everyone how deity like Martin Luther King Jr. was viewed. And just kind of to speak to this before my question, I kind of feel sometimes that seeing him that way made it seem like he was doing the work alone and kind of takes away from the, that he was human and the team that he had behind him and the people that made things happen, that organized. And so my question is, how would you suggest that people in our community get involved in activism that don't necessarily know where to go or what platforms exist? Because there are a lot of silos in nonprofit and in spaces where we're trying to do work, but I feel it's kind of disorganized. And so if you were to give a suggestion on how someone that doesn't know anything or know anyone should proceed, I just kind of want to know thoughts on that.
I think one very important thing about getting involved in activism locally is social media, keeping tabs and keeping up on the local grassroots organizations that do the work. I have a lot of examples. Defund the GRPD, the Grand Rapids Tenants Union, there's AIM, there's Let Our Voices Echo, there's Black Nation News, there's a lot of them that I can't even name off the top of my head, but keeping those following, keeping tabs on those organizations, they post different events they have going on. Like sometimes they go to Heartside and feed the unhoused. Sometimes they have different clothing drives. Sometimes they show up at the city commission meetings. Sometimes they do marches. And from there, I feel like it's a bit easier when you meet those people and have conversations and kind of network within that space. It makes it a lot easier to get involved. I think that's kind of where I started out, meeting different people and not only just getting involved as like someone who just goes to protests, but someone who organizes, and not only just organizing, but putting in your ideas as well, because I feel like it's a very open conversation in the community. And especially going to these city commission meetings, I've met a lot of people that I probably wouldn't have met just protesting in the streets at city commission meetings, working people, people who have kids, people who don't necessarily have the time or the availability to go to protests all the time, but to have these conversations with people who are just concerned about specific issues as you are, I think that's really important in terms of getting involved. Social media, definitely.
I would offer as well, depending on what part of town you live in, if they have a neighborhood association, to join your neighborhood association. The neighborhood associations are generally, we're uniquely organized here in Grand Rapids where each part of town has a neighborhood association. We used to have 5 black-controlled neighborhood associations in Southeast Grand Rapids. I learned neighborhood organizing, community organizing, from walking into the neighborhood association and learning how the neighborhood association engages with the city. If your part of town doesn't have a neighborhood association, get one established. We were able to get the first black-led and organized neighborhood association in Boston Square established. And if we didn't have that down there, we got a 1,000-pound gorilla that my man just mentioned down there. We wouldn't have any voice down in that neighborhood. And then I think, as the sister says, Allie, attend some meetings. Go into those meetings. Go to your school board meetings. Go into your city commission meetings, your county meetings. There's going to be other people there with similar passions and thoughts that you may have. I just am always, I chuckle at people who say they don't like to attend meetings, because I don't know, if you don't attend meetings, how do you find out what's happening? How do you share your voice? So you got a bunch of people who say, I want to make a difference. They don't go to a school board meeting. They don't go to a city commission meeting. So shout out to all the activists who have cut their teeth at the city commission meeting. We need more people at them county board meetings. And every meeting, everywhere there's dollars moving and policies being shared, you should be there to, and people will react different. We used to take a group of people into meetings and sit in the front row, because those board members, I don't care if they're city commissioner, they're gonna come and ask you, who are you? Because they don't even want you watching them. So attend meetings, ask questions, and open public comment, and join your neighborhood association, or start one if one doesn't exist in your neighborhood.
And real quick, I'll just add, on a personal kind of reflection note, is do a personal assessment of what is important to you. What do you value? What capacity do you have to get involved, right? Because like Allie said, and we've talked about, there's lots of different opportunities to get involved, and so do that personal assessment, because your time is valuable, your energy is valuable, and so what is important to you? How can you, what can you contribute in terms of time and energy, and then that will help to kind of narrow down, where you, what your niche is in this community. So,
Thank you.
We have a question from online that I want to lift up, but if you are interested in making a comment, you can make your way to the microphone here in the theater. The question is, do you still feel like there is housing racism like there was in the 1960s?
I think it's one of those moments that there's absolutely still racism, institutional racism in housing. I think it's still wild how, yes, Chicago may be one of the most segregated cities in America, but for a few years, Michigan was one of the most segregated states in the entire United States. So I think it's really important for us to not forget that these issues still are here. We still have to deal with them, of why is it all of these neighborhoods that have no funding and are all running down, and it's just important for us to look home and try to make your voice heard, try to fight, because we need more affordable housing. We need more accountability for all of these people saying, oh yeah, we'll make affordable housing, and then set aside 3 apartments and it holds 50. Come on, that ain't it. You just want that stipend. I think it's very important to just think, where am I living, and what does it look like 5 streets away from you? What does it look like a few neighborhoods next to you? Because you can be driving in one neighborhood and be like, ooh, and then suddenly 5 minutes later, you in East Grand Rapids and you have mansions. It don't make sense. And I think it's one of those things, and I speak from my experience from living in Detroit and seeing how it is. I took someone to Detroit recently, and they were like, oh, Detroit seems a lot nicer than what people say. And I'm like, yeah, we're downtown. If you go to where I grew up, you're gonna see the struggle. You're gonna see the vacant lots where buildings burnt down. They got foreclosed, squatters went in there, rigged up some electricity, but they didn't know what they was doing, and then it caught fire. And since the houses are so close together, it's not just one, it's 4 of them now. And now The banks don't want to fix them. They're like, these are just shells in a bad neighborhood, so let's just tear it all down. So now all that lead and asbestos gets into the ground. So now what you gonna do with this piece of land? You can't do anything, and there's no jobs around you to support yourself. And it's important, kind of circling back to the last question of where we get our money from. I think when we take money, we have to be accountable for how we use it and what we agree to. Because the DeVosses, I'm sorry, but they own Grand Rapids, or at least half of it, and the other half is Meyer. And I agree, we can fight back, but also we need to collect our own monies. And that's when we have to support one another, create communities. I remember when I was going to college, we were all struggling to eat, but we got creative. We had to do potlucks. Everybody bring a dish, everyone can have a meal now. We can have leftovers. It's like you have to support you and your friends and then support the community around you and keep expanding from there. And I think that can be really important.
Thank you. I appreciate what you said about the accountability. No matter where the source is, the accountability to do good with those resources is seated with organizations like Arbor Circle, other nonprofits, grassroots organization. Ultimately, we're accountable for the funds that we receive and how we choose to use those to make our communities better and how we choose to advocate for those that are marginalized. Did you want to say something back here? Okay, wonderful, thank you.
Hi, hello, my name is Martha. I'm a veteran of hollering at City Hall about housing, but this still really makes me nervous. There are things that you do when you love your community, and that is you get over it and you go forward. So I was thinking so much when I was watching the video again online about King in the Wilderness, and he had said something. He said, I think he was being interviewed by the media, about where the movement was going now after the civil rights movement and after they had, given black people the vote. And he said, well, both of those things didn't cost anything. He said, now we're getting into the areas where we need to restructure and redesign or re-architect the systems, and that's going to cost something. And I mean, that to me is the crux of what's going on in our community about housing. I loved when he went in the movie and he talked about going into Chicago and having all of their marches go up to realtors' doors. So in Grand Rapids, how West Michigan Nice does things is it was racism and redlining. But these days, and nobody in real estate even knows what redlining is. They're just passing around houses and continuing the same stream of money toward white communities, white people. But what was going on now is we have a housing issue. And so they divorce that by silence from racism. So I want to know what people are going to do because, I'm white. I grew up in this community and raised my son a single parent in special ed when it was not paid for. I've been homeless myself. And King is a hero because he wanted us all to see each other as the same. And I am the same as somebody who sits behind a desk down at City Hall. I'm an intelligent and creative and powerful person. And I should not have gone through homelessness, and no one else should either. Not in this community with this many resources. And yes, if we're talking about public safety, one of the things that he said was that about nonviolence, that he will still work relentlessly to erase the conditions that make violence probable. So while the police are down there wringing their hands about all the violence we have in our community, we don't have places for people to sleep. So there are some I'm going to get, because this is just, all right, I've said my point. I'm going to give somebody something to do. So I'm tired. So I relate to Dr. King, and I'm older. And I want to keep making an effort. And I'm going to show up, and I invite you to show up. There is something recent, new thing going on, Reinvest GR. And on the 24th at the Center for Community Transformation on Madison at 5:30 on a Tuesday, there will be reinvesting in affordable housing. So please bring your concerns and your one more head, because in those marches it was made up of all those people that showed up, and they were one more head in the audience. And please don't forget to keep showing up.
Other questions, comments? Anyone need a mic brought to them?
Good evening. How are y'all? So my question and kind of my comment is to some of the point made in the video that it's not just a political fight, it's a spiritual fight. Mm-hmm. And I think within a city like Grand Rapids, where there's West Michigan NICE, and you can't really implement these strategies of nonviolence because you're not faced always with violence. It's a lot of it is subversive as far as the approaches they take to racism, to undermining the affordability of housing, to employment. I feel like it's been said a few times that in a place like Grand Rapids, again, it is a large economic inequity here in the city. So my question for the panel would be, from an activist standpoint, from someone who has done social justice, what do you think the best approach would be moving forward, where you are giving these answers to wait, that it takes time, where people don't have time. They're at risk of losing their homes, they're losing their jobs, they can't afford to live in a place where they grew up.
So, the development happens. And one of the things that we know in our neighborhoods is that if you own your home and you're older, black or brown, don't sell your house. Just do not sell your home. And if you need some help, you can contact a lot of different organizations, but we have predatory developers who are in this town who are taking advantage of elderly, black and brown, and some whites as well. It happened on the west side. It's been gentrified a bit over there as well. So that's one of the first pieces that I would encourage, is that you have folks in your family who own their homes. Do not sell your homes. That's there's equity in those homes. That's how people build wealth and generational wealth. So that's that. But I like what the Sister Martha says around keep showing up. And I don't know any other way. You mentioned the spiritual piece, the same attitude for me that I have when I said they're not my lords. We have to understand that there's a theocratic system in place here. So just as much as we have the system of banking and corporate welfare and those things, those same people as well are trying to make us believe a certain thing theologically as well. And that's what I would challenge us all to. Do not let these systems make you, be it a so-called grassroots neighborhood black church that often is taking directive, no different than some of the corporate entities, from the theological people who are in charge here. So be in charge of your own thinking around your faith relative to what you believe, and be prepared to be victimized by your own ideas. For me, when I left Grand Rapids and I went to California and I saw that people do things differently, they think differently, they have more of an academic, intellectual exchange. People are afraid to talk about things here in Grand Rapids too often. They're afraid to talk about faith. They're afraid to talk about politics, and we just kind of go along to get along. So show up, as Martha says. Keep showing up, keep challenging, and none of these folks who may be billionaires, they're not our lords.
I think one quick thing, and then we can go on to the next one. When you say, what should we do, especially when we don't have time, I think this is the time to hold on to hope. And I think it's time to dream of what we could do, because at the end of the day, if we don't see any solutions, we're gonna have to make one. So we better start dreaming something now. And I think it's one of those things where you have to, my second piece of advice, taking care of yourself and your community too. So you got your best friends, you got your family. It can be blood or the ones you created, it doesn't matter. But being with them and trying to create a space, create your own little island in Grand Rapids, and I can guarantee that y'all can start building together, and other people are going to see what you're doing, and if they align with your morals, you can bring them in, because the more people, there's more power. But I think it's important to remember you have to have a strong foundation in order to build a movement.
Okay, hello. My name is Lane. Hi, Artemis. And I'm kind of going to start with a comment, and then just kind of maybe you all can elaborate, because I know that you, sir, spoke about the different actual approaches to like making political change, and that nonviolence isn't the only one. Because I remember in high school, the only time that I read anything that was counter to the myth of Dr. King, of just like this nonviolent, peaceful angel that, you know, whatever, was I actually read his letters from a Birmingham jail, and he spoke about how, and I'm paraphrasing, that more so than the violent, racist white Southerner, he found conflict and immovable space with liberals, liberal white people that prioritize their comfort over the lives and welfare of anybody who is not them. And it made me think about nonviolence as I think Arundhati Roy talks about nonviolence as a form of political theater, and that it's meant for an audience. And I believe it was Malcolm X that spoke about how it is for an audience who has a conscience. And I think that so much, especially in the last few years with our previous president and the coup he tried to make, it's very clear that there's a huge problem where America feels like it's losing that conscience less and less, or even the willingness to pretend to have a conscience. Because like Ali was saying, they made Breonna Taylor Way, and then as soon as there were protests around George Floyd and Patrick Lyoya, I can't remember which protest it was, but the GRPD shot somebody in the face with a gas grenade. And so how do we, I guess maybe the question is, how can we, what other modes besides this, like, deified nonviolence do you all find effective ways to move forward in the face of further backlash?
I'm going to ask if one of you could respond to that. I promise this person back here for a comment, she would have a chance to make our closing comment, so one of you could speak to that, and we'll move to our last question.
I think direct action is definitely a way to move forward. Because these type of issues, they want to be able to push it under the rug. I feel like if there wasn't for direct action surrounding Patrick Lyoya's murder, they would have done the exact same thing, swept it under the rug, and decided not to talk about it. I feel like with direct action, it not only is in your face, it's forcing a conversation. It's making it so people cannot ignore the issues that are at hand. Continuing to show up, continuing to be at their doorstep, per se, and making it so there's no walking away from it. There's no ignoring it on their end, neither is it ignoring it on our end. I feel like, once again, direct action, I'm always going to stand by direct action. I feel like that's a very effective way of bringing awareness to issues.
Good evening. My name is April. I'm sorry. Good evening. My name is April. I basically have been raised in this neighborhood. Went to school when it was the old Sixby School, the new Sixby School. As Mr. Brown stated, was bused to another area to go to school. I've seen this neighborhood go through changes that I can't even count on one hand anymore. Currently, well, let me start here. This is just a statement, not a question. This is my first meeting that I have attended. I was excited about attending this meeting. I had no idea what to expect. I applaud each of you for your activism. I'm a person that, again, lives in the community. I've lived east side of the state. I've lived in the South. When I left this city, I was able to understand my worth. This city I was not allowed to see my worth in this city because of the society that is in this city. What I mean by that is we are put into, I think Martha stated about red lines. This is a neighborhood I grew up in. When I grew up in this neighborhood, if you crossed Eastern, you were in another district. I can go over to Norwood, and now I'm almost in East Grand Rapids. Depending on which way I went, I may not be welcomed either way. So I've seen the neighborhoods change. I don't know what you're striking in me. I don't know if I want to become someone that attends these meetings. I know that it does bother me because I have seen a lot of change. I've raised 2 children. I have 2 grandchildren. I have a grandson that this is the first time I've experienced with a black male personally that I have to now care about growing up in this city. It's hard. It's very hard. I would still like to know why Patrick was pulled over initially, which was never really told, why the police officer turned around to pull him over in the first place. That was never given to us. There's a lot of things like that that still bother me and that always have. I can walk down Wealthy Street right now and there's probably 3 bars or restaurants with liquor license, but how many of them can you walk into and be greeted and welcomed into as a person of color? Some of them still don't want you there. To be quite frank, they don't want you in. There's a butcher shop. There's a carpet place that's been here for years. Like I said, I grew up in this neighborhood. I'm talking from the 70s and probably earlier than that. How many times have you seen anyone in this neighborhood frequent that business and have them come into your home and do work in your home? But they're in your neighborhood. So stuff like that does bother me, but to become an activist, as you spoke earlier, my own mental health will not allow it. Because I am not gonna sit back nonviolently. I look at the question up there about the North and the South. Oh, well, at least we know what to expect in the South. But I'll tell you what, in the South, you have more people of color in positions that are making a change than you do in the North. And that's what I've seen. Again, I commend you. I wish you all the well in your work. If I'm able to join, I don't know if I will or not. I am in a committee in my organization and where I work. We're trying to make a change. It's uncomfortable, and that's, I know, where we have to be. But as people, we first need to understand that everybody doesn't think like everyone. Everyone's not going to get it. Some of us have Martin Luther King Day off. Some of us don't. Some of us rejoice in it. Others don't understand why we get it off. It's unfortunate, but these are the things that are not going to allow us to continue to move, because no one can understand the fact that I can respect you for having your thought, but not let it judge how I look or judge you. And I think that's where it all begins. That's just my opinion. But thank you for your time.
I just want to kind of, a point that I want to share and just kind of, for us to remember is that activism looks different in different ways, right? We can be part of this system, this forward movement in different ways. So, you won't catch me out in the street right now, protesting, because that's not the space that I do best in, right? In my 20s, I was marching on Washington, I was doing these things, that was how I was active, in my 20s, right? Now in my 30s, it's how can I support people that are out in the community doing these things? How can I provide, what I can provide to those people in that space? And so we all have a part to play, whether you're leaders in organizations, whether you're part of your neighborhood association, whether this is your first meeting, we can all be activated in certain ways. You can write a letter, behind your computer, write a letter to your senators, write a letter to your commissioners, right? Make calls, right? You can attend meetings. So there's lots of different ways to activate. If you're a leader, if you have any position of power in any situation, you can start by looking at how you are reflecting back in the community. What's values to you? What do you have to unlearn, right? So we all have a part to play. And it might not look like marching in the streets. It might not look like being in, committee meetings or whatnot, but you can activate in a way that you're ready to, right? And step on that growth edge and say, okay, I attended my first meeting. The next meeting, maybe I'm going to do something else, right? Or that way. So I just wanted to bring that to pause, that we all can be activated in different ways, and activism doesn't have to look one way or the other to make change together.
And, okay. I just really appreciate that comment that you brought up, and I think that's very real and genuine, and I appreciate the, candor. And I want to also challenge you to think about why you felt something in this meeting right now, why you feel pulled to go to those meetings. Explore that within yourself, and honestly, I think it's great to have these conversations now. It's never too late. And you say you wouldn't be able to do activism work, but just as you said, it can be a lot of different ways. And I think one good way to start in a quest, I guess, for activism is to do that inner work and have uncomfortable conversations. Go to those meetings, talk to people who you've never talked to before, and hear their insight on everything that they have to say, and that's going to make a world of a difference. And honestly, there's a lot of Instagram activists who go out there, and sure, they go to all the protests, they love seeing themselves at the meetings and things. We don't need no more Sean Kings, I'm sorry. You need to go and do something that you actually feel a passion for, and you gotta find that first. And that's okay. Have uncomfortable conversations, and then the next step can be there. Because honestly, you need to listen to what the community's already trying to build up.
Thank you. Let's give everyone a hand. Let's give our audience, our panelists, Allie, Vanessa, Artemis, Rodney, thank you so much for everything that you poured into us. Thank you to everyone online. Thank you to everyone in the theater today. We really appreciate you supporting this event to commemorate the MLK, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. holiday. One of the things I want to say is that the first conversation we need to have is with ourselves, right? There might be some things we need to understand about what our motivations are. Like Vanessa already knows she's one of my sheroes, but she really challenged us also to think about what we need to unlearn. In order to understand, there's some things we have to unlearn to make space for new ideas, to make space for how we've been impacted by these systems, regardless of whether we chose some things or those things chose us because of the environments that we are in. We have to start that personal activism of understanding. And I would say, and maybe I'm saying this because I am a parent, if you are a parent or you care for someone in this community, young or old, you are already on the front lines of something because somebody is depending on you to help them in their struggle. So as parents, as people who love this community, there are things that we can do, whether they're small, whether they make the paper, whatever. They're all things that we can do on different levels. Everybody's not called to the stage, but we all do have a part to play to improve our communities. And we can love our communities, still criticize them, still be concerned about what's going on. So I hope no one is taking some of this conversation to mean that we don't love our communities, because if we love our communities, we are concerned about what's going on, and we do have a desire to make things better. All right, I'm stepping down from my soapbox because it's 7:57, and we want to get you all out on time. Again, I just want to say thank you to our panel. I think there's another slide here for our, just recognizing our sponsors, Grand Rapids Urban League, Macatawa Bank, GVSU, Micah Myers. We want to thank those folks. Thanks, Dr. Truss. And I want to recognize our CEO, Kristen Gietzen, is here in the audience, and some of our administrative leaders and staff. This event would not have been possible without some tremendous staff to help organize and plan it. So we just thank you for being here, and we will consider ourselves adjourned or dismissed or whatever the word is we use when it's the end of the program. Thank you.